Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So today's episode comes to you courtesy of Tyler, who's been supporting this channel as a Golden Pig tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Tyler, so again, Tyler, thank you so much. And actually today, Tyler's going to handle the intro for me.
Hello, Mitch. This is Tyler from California once again. Thank you for having me back. For my second deck tech, I would like to see how you build for the non-legendary creature Shaman of the Great Hunt, focusing on +1/+1 counter aggro.
So, as Tyler said, on this episode, we're going to be doing something different. We're going to be building around a non-legendary creature with Shaman of the Great Hunt as our commander. Now, yes, technically by the rules of Commander, this is not a legal commander. That being said, as long as you ask others ahead of time, many Commander players out there are completely fine with a non-legendary creature as your commander. I have personally never run into one player that is not okay with me playing my rarity deck as it is, but just in case I do have a commander backup. So before building around and trying to play a non-legendary creature as your commander, make sure it's okay with your playgroup first, or just be aware that you're at least going to have to ask before you play them. With all that said, like Tyler said, this deck is going to be focusing on +1/+1 counter aggro. Shaman of the Great Hunt is a 4/2 Orc Shaman with haste that costs 3 and a red. It says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. On top of that, it's got Ferocious for 2 Simic, draw a card for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. So the more times you hit your opponents with your creatures, the bigger they get thanks to those counters. And the more creatures that you have in play that have power 4 or greater, the more cards you're going to be drawing with that ability. So we're going to be utilizing a very aggressive strategy with very low to the ground and evasive creatures. We're going to get a ton of creatures out, hit our opponents to grow them quickly, and then draw a lot of cards thanks to our massive amount of creatures. So let's first start off by talking about some small creatures that can help us go even faster. First up, we're going to run some low-to-the-ground creatures that can also help us ramp with Elvish Pioneer, Frozen Wayfarer, and Skyshroud Ranger. Elvish Pioneer is a 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield, we get a basic land from our hand into play tapped. This might just be the best turn 1 play that we have, essentially just getting out one creature that lets us get out up to 3 in the next turn. And then, our commander in the turn after that. So yeah, have fun. Another good turn 1 play though is Frozen Wayfarer, which we can sacrifice to get a land from our hand into play. And then Skyshroud Ranger is actually a repeatable way to get those lands from our hand into play by tapping it to do so. Another turn 1 creature that can help us out though is Diligent Farmhand, which we can pay 1 and a green to sacrifice to search our library for a basic land and get into play tapped. And speaking of searching our library for basic lands, there's Harvest Season. It's going to get us X basic lands into play tapped for X the number of tapped creatures we control. So yeah, for just 3 mana, believe me, we're going to get an absurd amount of lands with this. Next up though, we've got another creature that can help us out with Rishkar Pima Renegade. When Rishkar comes into play, we get a +1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, and then every single creature we control with a counter on it has tap add green. Essentially, this turns every single creature in our deck into a mana dork because, again, our commander is going to be getting counters on them too. And speaking of turning all of our creatures into mana dorks, let's talk about Song of Freyalise. It's a saga, and its first and second lore counters say, until your next turn, creatures you control gain, tap add 1 mana of any color. And then its third lore counter can be incredibly effective as well. It says, put a +1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn. So this can help us ramp as well as help pump our creatures and swing out too. And speaking of helping us ramp, there's Frontier Siege, which helps us in a different way. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to choose cons, and it says at the beginning of each of your main phases, add green to your mana pool. So first up, very quickly, we're going to get all of our mana back that we spent into this, and then some more. This can be great to get out more and more creatures in a turn, or even better, it can be a great way to activate our commander's ability even more. Again, between our two main phases, this essentially gives us 4 free mana in a turn. So then for our commander's ability in each of those main phases, we just have to pay 2 generic mana to activate that incredible ability and draw a ton of cards. But to actually draw all those cards, we need a lot of creatures in play, and a lot of evasive creatures in play so they can grow quickly, so let's move on and talk about those. We are running an absurd amount of 1 mana evasive creatures in this deck, and some of the very best are Slitherblade, Triton Shorestalker, and Mistcloak Herald. Each of these are creatures that just cost a blue, have 1 power, and can't be blocked. So we get them out early, we start swinging, and as soon as our commander comes out, they're going to start getting more and more counters. And we've got one more unblockable creature with Gadul Lurker, a 1/1 that can't be blocked, and it's got Megamorph, though we're probably never really going to be doing that. But also for just a blue mana, we've got Merfolk Spy and Rashadan Dockhand. Each of these have Island Walk, which means they can't be blocked as long as the defending player controls an island. Chances are very likely that at least one of your opponents is going to be running an island, because blue is a very popular and powerful color in Magic. On top of that, when Merfolk Spy deals counter damage to a player, they reveal a random card from their hand, so that's a nice additional benefit, but again, the main thing is that it's unblockable. And Rashadan Dockhand can actually pay 1 to tap target land, which can come in handy too, but again, unblockable is more what we care about. And next up, we've got Marsh Boa and Jukai Messenger, each of which has a different kind of land walk with Swamp Walk and Forest Walk. Again, like blue, black and green are 2 of the more popular and powerful colors in Magic, so yeah, there's going to be a lot of commander players out there utilizing them. And as long as you can get these through on 1 player, that's essentially all you need. But we're also going to be utilizing a different form of evasion with flyers such as Fairy Seer, Silver Raven, and Artificer's Assistant. Flying is a fantastic form of evasion, and generally it's going to be enough to get through on at least 1 opponent. On top of that, when Fairy Seer enters the battlefield, we scry 2. When Silver Raven does so, we scry 1. And Artificer's Assistant has, whenever you cast a historic spell, scry 1. So we're definitely not going to complain about a nice additional benefit on these. And then we've also got some other 1 mana flyers with additional benefits with Merfolk Windrobber, Pteramander, and Jace's Phantasm. Merfolk Windrobber is going to mill a player when it hits them, and we can also sacrifice it to draw a card if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Pteramander has pay 7 in a blue, adapt 4. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each instant sorcery card in your graveyard. And then Jace's Phantasm can also become a 5/5 as long as the opponent's got 10 or more cards in their graveyard. So these 2 creatures can start off as very small threats and turn into much bigger threats later on in the game. And speaking of a very big small threat, let's talk about Hypnotic Siren. It has Bestow for 5 blue, and it has flying, and it says you control enchanted creature, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. So if we really want to steal an opponent's creature with this, we can. And then Siren Storm Tamer can help us out in a different way. By paying a blue, we can sack it and counter target spell or ability that targets us or a creature we control. So in a pinch, this can help us save ourselves or a key creature like our commander. And then on top of flying, Spectral Sailor also has flash, and by paying 3 in a blue, we draw a card. Though keep in mind that our commander can draw us a lot more cards for essentially that same price. Next up, we just have some pretty much standard flyers with Cloud Sprite, Zephyr Sprite, and Scrib Sprites, which are 1/1 flyers. And keep in mind that Cloud Sprite can also only block creatures with flying, but that's okay. And then we've got some more flyers for just a blue with Fairy Miscreant, Wingcrafter, and Cloudfin Raptor. Fairy Miscreant actually has a good amount of text, which really doesn't matter for the most part in Commander since we can't have multiple copies of it. And then Wingcrafter has Soul Bond. As long as it's paired with another creature, both creatures have flying. So this can help a non-evasive creature like our commander get through as well. And then Cloudfin Raptor does start off as a 0/1, but it's gonna evolve, so it's gonna grow as we get bigger and bigger creatures in play. Finally, we've got some creatures that don't technically have flying, but can't be blocked except by flyers like Treetop Scout, Spire Tracer, and Signal Pest. And actually, Treetop Scout's actually pretty interesting because it can't be blocked by creatures with reach, which, yeah, can usually block creatures with flying, but this doesn't have flying. And then Spire Tracer and Signal Pest can be blocked by creatures with flying or reach, and on top of that, Signal Pest has Battle Cry, so whenever it attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So Signal Pest can be a fantastic way for us to pump our team and hit our opponents even harder, and also get to that 4 power requirement quicker. And speaking of all that, let's talk about a fantastic card for this deck with Relentless Assault. It says untap all creatures that attack this turn after this main phase, their additional combat phase followed by additional main phase. Basically, you get an extra combat. And again, an extra combat for this deck's purposes can be incredibly impactful. We get to swing again and dish out even more damage, and again, when we hit our opponents, we get even more counters on our creatures. And speaking of getting more counters on our creatures, let's talk about Curse of Predation. It says enchant player, whenever a creature attacks enchanted player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So now, whenever we swing at that player and we hit them with our creatures, we're getting 2 counters instead of 1. And it can also make that player a decent target for other opponents to attack at as well. But then there's Wizard class, which helps us out in a different way. It's a class enchantment that says you have no maximum hand size, and then by getting to level 2, it says when this class becomes level 2, draw 2 cards, and then at level 3 is when it becomes very impactful for this deck. It says whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Again, our commander can draw us an absurd amount of cards, so having no maximum hand size is lovely with that. But again, when we do that, now we can distribute a counter for every single card that we draw and grow our creatures even quicker. But next up, let's talk about a way to help our creatures hit even harder and get even more counters with Berserker's Onslaught. It's an enchantment that says attacking creatures you control have double strike. So when we swing out with our creatures and we hit our opponent, we're going to be hitting them twice. This is incredibly effective with our commander's combat damage trigger. We get our commander's trigger twice, and on that second hit again, because we already got that counter on our creature, we're hitting them even harder than the first time. And speaking of hitting our opponents hard, let's talk about Scale Up. With Scale Up's overload cost of 4 green, it's going to basically turn every single one of our creatures into a green worm with base power and toughness 6/4. So we're going to have a ton of evasive 6 power worms on the field that again are even bigger depending on how many counters they have on them. And of course, we can also utilize Overrun to power up our creatures as well, giving our creatures +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. But after we've dished out damage, grown our creatures, and drawn a ton of cards thanks to our commander, we've got even more ways to get even more creatures in play. For example, Ayula's Influence is a fantastic card in this deck. It says discard a land card, create a 2/2 green bear creature token. So after drawing an absurd amount of cards, those lands on our hand are no longer dead cards, they're bears. So we can flood the board with a ton of tokens and have fun from there. We can also flood the board with crab tokens though, thanks to Scuttletide. It has pay 1, discard a card, create a 0/3 blue crab creature token, and it's got Delirium. Crabs you control get +1/+1 as long as there are 4 more card types among cards in your graveyard. But actually, with discarding, we've got a way to make even better creatures with Drakehaven. Because whenever we discard a card, we can pay 1, and if we do, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. Again, our commander can draw us a ton of cards, so even just going to our end step and having to discard can actually make us a lot of evasive creatures. Or we can actually just make a couple of massive creatures with something like Ominous Seas. It says whenever you draw a card, put a foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas, and by removing 8 of those counters, we get an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. So yeah, thanks to our commander's insane card advantage, we can definitely get some heavy hitters with this. Or we can essentially just double up our army and flood the board with something like Notorious Throng. It says create X/1/1 Black Fairy Rogue creature tokens with flying, where X is the damage dealt to your opponents this turn. If this spell's prowl cost was paid, take an extra turn for this one. And actually, we do have a couple of rogues in this deck, so we very well might get that extra turn. But again, even if not, being able to create a ton of evasive creatures is huge. And then finally, there's Jolreal Munvali Recluse, which can help us out in multiple ways. She has whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 2/2 green cat creature token. So again, our commander can definitely help with that, but more importantly, she has pay 4 green until end of turn. Creatures you control have base power and toughness XX for X number of cards in your hand. Again, with this deck, we can draw an absurd amount of cards, so yeah, Jolreal can turn all of our creatures into absolute monsters. And speaking of drawing an absurd amount of cards, let's move on to our next section. And to start things off here, I'm going to talk about the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Biomancer's Familiar. It's a 2/2 mutant for green-blue, and it says activate abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the amount of mana and ability cost to activate to less than 1 mana. And tap, the next time target creature adapts this turn, it adapts as though it had no +1/+1 counters on it, but that part really isn't all that impactful in this deck. But of course, the part that is incredibly impactful is reducing the cost of an activated ability. Our commander's activated ability specifically. Again, the amount of value that we can get out of our commander's activated ability is already a ton. We can pay 4 mana to draw an absurd amount of cards, but thanks to this in play, it only costs us 2 mana, which is just absolutely incredible. Again, just imagine drawing 10 plus cards for just 2 mana, and we can just do that as many times as we want for as much mana as we have. Yeah, Biomancer's Familiar makes our commander's activated ability, which is already incredible, even more incredible, and that's what makes it the golden pick of the stack. Regardless though, outside of our commander though, we've got other ways to draw cards with things like Reconnaissance Mission, Deep Fathom Skulker, and Bred for the Hunt. Both Reconnaissance Mission and Deep Fathom Skulker say, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So now on top of getting a counter on our creatures, we also draw cards. And then Bred for the Hunt is somewhat similar. It says whenever a creature you control with a ++1 counter on it deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So essentially our creature's initial hit on players isn't going to draw us that card, but when they get those counters on them, they do. We can also draw cards though with things like Keeper of Fables, Armorcraft Judge, and Shamanic Revelation. Keeper of Fables says whenever one or more non-human creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. And then Armorcraft Judge's ETB is going to draw us a card for each creature we control with a ++1 counter on it. And then Shamanic Revelation is going to draw us a card for every single creature we control, and it's going to gain us 4 life for every single creature we control with power 4 or greater. But now that we've talked about cards that can help us out with our plans, let's talk about some ways to throw a wrench into our opponent's plans. So we're going to be utilizing some creatures that can help us remove some pesky permanents with Caustic Caterpillar, Masked Vandal, and Reclamation Sage. With the Caterpillar, we can pay 1 and a green to sack it to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Masked Vandal has 1 ETBs, we can exile a creature from our graveyard. If we do, we exile target artifact or enchantment opponent controls. And then Rex Sage's ETB is simply when it comes into play, destroy target artifact or enchantment. And then there's Trigon Predator, which has flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. Next up, there's Artifact Mutation, which is going to destroy target artifact and make us a ton of saproling tokens, where X is that artifact's converted mana cost. And then there's Storm the Citadel, which can destroy a lot of things for us. It says until end of turn, creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. So this pumps all of our creatures and essentially makes them all into Trigon Predators. Next up, some other mass removal spells that we've got are Aether Gale, Whelming Wave, and Displacement Wave. Aether Gale is going to bounce 6 target non-land permanents back to the owner's hands. And then Whelming Wave is going to pretty much bounce all creatures back to their hands except for Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents. Next up, Displacement Wave is very flexible, costing X blue, and it's going to bounce all non-land permanents with converted mana cost X or less to the owner's hands. And then finally, we've got Negate, which can counter-target non-creature spell, Unified Will, which is going to counter-target spell if we control more creatures than that spell's controller, and Inspiring Call, which can be fantastic in this deck. It's going to draw us a card for each creature we control with a ++1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. So this can essentially protect our entire army on top of drawing us an absurd amount of cards. But now that we've talked about all the non-land cards in this deck, let's talk about the price. This deck was built within a budget restriction in that every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1. So as you can see on the left, the estimated cost of this deck is just $28.04. Now keep in mind that that actually includes the basic lands at 10 cents a piece, so if you've already got those, take that cost out. And this estimated cost actually doesn't take into account heavily played or damaged cards, so yeah, that cost could be even lower if you're willing to give those cards a home. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include shipping, which can definitely vary depending on your location. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.